Welcome all to another session of Keen on Architecture, drawing key buildings globally in perspective. Draw long sessions, a little bit under an hour. If you haven't been able to find the PDF to print from, you can simply stop the image now and print the base sheet of the Taj Mahal, our subject for today. I prefer the 11 by 17 format because it's more of a tableau to draw onto, but you can also do it 8.5 by 11 if you prefer. So what's different about the Taj Mahal today is that it's so pure geometrically in all directions, all cardinal axes. It's even laid out north, south, east, and west on its site. Is instead of drawing it from what we've done in the first several sessions so far in a type of perspective where one side dominates over another and you have parallel lines vanishing to a point to the right and the left, we're going to rotate that. We're going to stay exactly on axis and then flip the image up so that we see a dominant point right in the middle. So instead of being a 2-point perspective, this will be a 1-point perspective. The rules are still the same as if you follow back from the base of the lovely waterway esplanade that leads towards the Taj Mahal mausoleum here, it'll actually point to that point of reference on that middle line. And that's going to guide us to find that 1 point on our horizon line across the base of the drawing. And because it's so axial pure, the 1 point then becomes so dominant that it makes the need for having a right vanishing point off to the right or left kind of obsolete in this case. If we were to shift off axis and draw it more from here, this direction, then indeed the sides would vanish left and right. We're going to stay on axis just for a change of pace here now and draw it from this view shed right looking like this. As you enter from the gate, you see the massive central arch, which then guides you into the interior of the space to see the tomb of Mumtaz Mahal, the wife of the Shah Jahan, commissioned in 1631. He was the 5th Mughal emperor in India at the time, in Uttar Pradesh, in the city of Agra on the river Yamuna. So our first key aspect here was going to be looking at this elevation, which means everything on either side, it's almost like a mirror image of the other. It's absolutely symmetrical. So we'll drop that down and use it as our rules. Whatever we're going to draw here, we'll do on this side in terms of line. And then we'll use the sun's light to create more of a mass out of it and use our value skills. So what's going to be key to this, understanding the language of this, the incredible celebration by this man for his wife, is really there to crown the notion that Islam is a religion of love, and Islam being split into two, the Sunni or the Shia. She was Shia-based and he was Sunni-based, and yet still he has this enormous memorial to her life as she passed in, I think, the delivery of their 14th child. So the spectacle of this shows the promise of the language of creating an architecture which again links the earthly with the heavenly. And so we see in planets a relationship of the square format of the earthen bound and then the hemispherical into the full sphere itself up above as it rises, and you sort of again have this sense of aura of the sky joining with the earth, which makes it more of a spectacle on the site of the Taj Mahal. Or the materials are such that if you're there for an extended time, and most tourists do come and stay a long time closer to sunrises and sunsets to see the very spectacular change in colors of how the materials itself seem to change over the scope of the journey of the day. So we'll start at the top, and we'll use that base drum of the dome here as a cylinder that's wrapping around, just like we've done before on some others. And when it comes down to wrap to the back side of it, we don't see that. but we use that nice arc to show that we're underneath that because it's so much taller than us. So if we did the garden base we are now, where the waterways on our central axis leads us to our one vanishing point, then there is a base yet that separates this mausoleum to the actual ground plane of that. And then from that point, we'll have the arch of that central aspect come down, again, mirrored on both sides with biaxial symmetry. And that's encased in a square. And what we're going to do is continue that all the way down without having this horizontal line vanish anyway, because it's so balanced in the middle now, is that it doesn't tend to move to the left or tend to move to the right. It remains just a flat line. So our whole base can remain a flat line. The bottom where it meets the ground is a flat line. But now, since we're now perpendicular to that, that one point will govern the movement of the waterway, which comes all the way up to the edge of the base with its walkway on the other side of it. So the walkway makes a long U shape, which runs the whole length of the campus of the garden that leads you toward the frontispiece of the architecture. Complete the right side of the box over here. So it's very flat and two-dimensional. So we'll make it more three-dimensional when we get to value, but it'll show the presence and sort of the composition of what we're looking at. Now over here on the right, before we get too far with line work, we're going to inference the idea of the mechanics of this just in the graphic. So let's put down this baseline here, very simply drawn, and find its center axis. As we build this out, we'll see that square we initially drew here is then supported by secondary and then tertiary volumes. And this supports the large dome up top. And when that breaks, there are 4 secondary domes. So you can see then from the top of this arc of the dome coming down to the side toward the corner, we're actually doing, again, like we've seen in other architecture, it seems orthogonal or it seems curvilinear, but in fact, it's using the language of triangles to keep it structurally sound. And then the stages for different components within the space then break down that triangle on the way. So even though what perceives to be this rotunda on top of square boxes is really fortified with the language of how the geometry of the angular quality of triangles can help make it more structurally sound over time. Okay, so we'll continue more with the separate pieces here. The next here we did kind of in a quick sketch there. Sort of shows the whole pattern of the next box that supports it. And then that box continues around the side and becomes octagonal in plan. But there we'll see an angle. It's not really vanishing. It simply is going back at a 45 degrees. So for instance, if we were to continue this out and make a square in perspective, you could bisect it and then find this line going back. So that's what this piece looks like as it goes back on a diagonal, a pure 45-degree diagonal. And that's the end of the interior floor plan on both sides. The building is basically a large 2-story interior volume. So at the second level, we'll see the base of arches which spring from either side. And they simply repeat as they stand on top of each other. And we'll see less of this because it's on a plane that's going away from our view shed. And as I mentioned, on top of the four corners in plan type, it's got secondary small bulbous domes, which rise up and just meet the edge in perspective now that run a bit behind the front box. And then there's a central arch and a central plane for each of these. And then we see a little bit, because they're in a sense the same type of plan type as the overall box, the sides to it go back on a diagonal in both cases of the two front domes we see. And then there is a bit of a cornice line which finishes the walls that support the domes that rise up. Okay, beneath the dome itself, there's a necking for it. And that's a little bit shallower than that. As this line approaches the horizon line here, it would get flatter and flatter and flatter. So we're still underside that up above. That rises up. And this very clean volume up top isn't a pure arc. It's got a little bit of an overstatement of it coming beyond the actual structure and returning to it, hence the term an onion dome. And at the top, the decorative element that rises up to its finial. Now at the base here is the garden. And so off this point, because we're right on that axis and everything else is so organized around north, south, east, west coordinates, we can put in then extended lawns on either side. So it goes from walkway to lawn to another walkway, to lawn again, and eventually feathers out to the side. We'll kind of stop that with some vegetation. And along that, then, there's growth that works from the height of an individual to the height of these vertical bushes that are put in a coordinate along the way that keeps the movement sort of very regimented and mathematical. So we simply need to go from that horizon line and then come up to that height of where those are working, and they're taller than the individuals walking by them. So we'll go on both sides as the height, which gives us sort of a place to run them from the base up to the top. So on this green walkway, we can simply draw the line for them now and just have a series of, in a sense, the trunk of these bushes that are small trees that will rise up, and the space between them getting longer and longer, and do the same thing on the other side where they're condensed first and getting spaced out more and more. And then we'll come in to show the actual form making. So they might be a type of evergreen that's got tight vertical foliage. On both sides. And then before it comes to the ground, we see its actual trunk or shaft for the tree. And we continue out as far as this that we like, to the last one. But it still doesn't give us identification of a scale yet, because we don't know, because the trees can be hedged or trimmed a certain dimension. We don't know what that is until we put something of human scale inside here. So let's go ahead and find off the horizon line a place to put people meandering through the garden. So for instance, when we're looking from this vantage point, we're actually up on a plinth above this, looking down a bit. So at our eye height, the people in the distance walking far away, they're on that horizon line very far. So it gives it the scale of the enormity of the structure. And then closer to us, there might be people that are on this walkway on that one, but they're depressed in that land. So their eye height won't quite meet ours. It'll be a little bit lower down. So you get the sense that this person's in a plane beneath that person because they're on the horizon line. So other people walking on that walkway further away, and the people down below here would share the same perspective of that head meeting this head. So the body gets larger, but their heads are contained on the same vanishing point. And so that'll help present scale to people walking around in the garden here. So we just have to make sure that their feet line up and their heads line up as they sort of animate the space and show the scale of people walking around. Okay, then on the corners for these are the towers, the minarets, where people are called to prayer, and they're in 3 sections each. And they rise up, and they're also going to be in perspective in this. But as you can see, if we're looking this way, the one point that controls everything here actually controls the movement from the top of this tower to the back tower down to that one point. So in this case, the tops that we have here on the left and right, minarets on the sides, are spaced away from the form of the mausoleum itself, right and left. And they were built with a distance away because towers can be tricky over time, and sometimes they decline and fall structurally. So they're designed, if they fail, to fall away from the Taj Mahal. And because there's a series of arcs that go around the cylindrical quality of these, the ones at the base are almost flat lines, just ticking up barely above the horizon line. The next one from the next third a little bit more. The top one is the biggest arc we see. Repeat that on this side. So each time it becomes a little bit more accentuated, that arc, to be underneath that circle. And then finally up to the little cupola that creates a space for the people to climb up to. And then there's a ring of arches around there. So we'll do the 1 or 2 in front, and 1 on the side, 1 or 2 in front, and 1 that wraps around the side of that. And we'll use value to show that space under that dome in a little bit. Okay, so that the 2-story space have got these very, very large porches that come out off of here, which create shaded areas in there. So all of them will have access points to them, doorways that take you out to that space. This one's on that edge. And then, as we mentioned, the grand door up here, right on axis. And then there's some striation on the wall inside there, but we'll probably wash that out with value a little bit at the 2nd floor. Another small bit of fenestration. And then the box has got tiers of decorative detail. Again, since it's in Islamic faith, it's not iconographic. It is very staid and geometric patterns based off of natural systems and natural geometries. So that basically establishes the line work for us. And now, as usual, we move toward form making through the value. And coming off of the last sketch we did together, there will be this reflective pool that shows the ability to show this information down inside of this. So one of the first things we want to do off of this baseline, we have this distance down to our horizon line, then repeat that distance, and that'll establish where that door is. And then we do the same thing. We go from here to here. Now we repeat to the spring point of that arch. So that comes where that bottom of the door is. And so from here down, we've got that distance. And coming off that straight down, Excellence as well. And so maybe right at the base of the drawing here, we see a little bit of that front arch right about there. And of course, some of the boxing around that. And then we'll detail that with value to make sure that's less dominant than the actual architecture itself, but gives the sense of, again, being a reflective quality beneath it. So now we simply want to pick one of numerous sun angles. The sun tracks through the sky here. You can pick anyone you want, but I would assume that we have to have the glory of the sun on the front elevation here, and then pick one side to receive more of the shading. So let's just simply follow what we see here in this little photograph of it, where we'll take the dome itself, and again, that arc is going to be a little bit darker here, and then swing around and kind of curl back, and then be a little bit on this side of it, a little bit darker too, as it meets the sky adjacent to it. So a little value over here to start with, and then onto the right side. And we'll treat this with layers and zones as we move about our value change. Same is true here. It's got a little bit of a movement that'll move from left to right and eventually then shade all the zones in the necking that holds that dome. And then because these are all recessed into the main volume, so that since there's a skirt of open airways on the outside skin until you get to the volume, all those here we can see the actual wall on this side, and the wall, that's the depth of that side. But the rest we just see kind of point view, so each one will get a shading of tone because it doesn't receive direct light midday. And this is the deepest of them all that takes us into the major chamber. And we simply follow around symmetrically on both sides of our 1-point perspective here. And now on this case, this is octagonal in shape, so we'll see certainly on the right side over here, the darkest of the skins there, and that goes up, and we don't see the space between this because of the perspective point we're looking at here, and the right side of this one. And then it's domed aspect up here. Has a little lip at the top, its own finial. And then the right side, really down the right side again, with that wraparound kind of hyperbolic paraboloid that's going to give it the sense of being lit, and then the light splays on either side. So really right there is the point where the sun hits. So if you detail it more and more, that'll be the only true white, and that becomes less and less as it makes its way around and wraps around the dome. And that's what creates that 3 dimensions on our two-dimensional media here. So these are rotundas, the minarets here. Again, we're not going to see the two in the back because it's tilted such, and we're such a view shed that as we get closer to this, these come in closer too, and they make the view in the back not possible for us to see here. But we do have the whole right side being in shade on the minarets. And this entire skin over here which again is a facing away from the sun, moving across the skin and setting on the west side over here. At the grade level, the darkest tone forest will probably be the same idea of having this dark being in the water, the reflection of it. So we match that. Nothing else is reflective here because this is all garden space. So what we can do is come over to past the walkway, which would be, even though it's a stone base, a darker material, it'll never match the darkness of the grass, the lawn area. So this whole zone becomes a darker tone. and then vanishes back to our point. We can keep the people with white shirts to make sure they still read in the distance. And then simply take that U shape over on this side, and we'll wash out a bit of that earlier sketch we did about the triangle. And then there's another great walkway over here, which we drew in. And then beyond that, there's a movement over in this direction to yet another walkway. So this zone over here shows more of the lawn. And then this zone on this side shows the quality of the lawn. And of course, all the U's that are done, the type of, whether there's a version of a skyrocket juniper, something that holds its form through all seasons here, helps create a cadence of the distance between where we're standing and the mausoleum in the backdrop. And now we're going to come to some of the points of things that are in shade or the depths of shadows. So these are open air. So we're going to see through this to the backside of sky there. So we want to play that very white off of a very dark underside, because we're so low beneath them, we can see the depth of the arcade that creates that space. And we repeat that on the other side. You see this same arch on the back side, so the underside of it doesn't receive light at all. And then finally over here, one last turn like that. And because the light is definitely off center to the left a little bit here, even though this is a grayed out area because it's recessed, there's much less light up towards the top and then towards the left side. So we can go ahead and sort of hint at the idea of it's darker on this side and then fades out to an overall gray for the whole interior, exterior space there. I do the same for all these, where at the top it's a bit darker and chases down, and a bit darker up top and chases down. And that's the subtlety of gradation, so that you're never just simply coloring one tone for a whole plane. You're modulating it so that there's life in the shadow itself. And this plinth that it sits on is the same very bright marbled material, so it's going to be sort of a white framework for the base of the building. It'll come down and hit some of its own vegetation that goes parallel to it, so it'll be smaller in scale but move across the base there as a nice dark forest. That runs the whole bottom edge of that as the gardens spring out, because there's hundreds and hundreds of acres of gardens here outside the mausoleums that are built on the site. And they're not subject matter and they're far away, so they're just going to be a diagram for shape and form in the distance. It took about 20 years to complete, and historians argue that there were probably 20,000 people on site. It's a World Heritage Site, as you can imagine, from 1983, and is considered the jewel of Muslim art. One of the best examples of Mughal architecture and a symbol of India's rich history, to the point that the Taj Mahal has about 10 to 12 replicas of it, because it is so sensational, and until to this day is a major attraction for global tourism. And of course, the entire campus that it's on, the 42 acres, centers on the plan of the Taj Mahal, and you can see the biaxial symmetry to it. So if you wanted to rotate it around, it's the same type of object in space. So it's got that sort of level of perfection that really draws the honor of historians and travelers worldwide. The dome's about 115 feet tall, so it's not an enormous building, but the quality of the architectural detailing is spectacular. The central axis is the ruling force, obviously, that brings in the harmonies of the systems, sort of the balance of it. And again, it's cardinal north-south, so that twice a year for the equinox, it's got that language of working with the sun and the movement of the stars up above. And that change of the planes and colors up above are then mirrored or reflected in the exterior material here. It's not your typical stone. It's a really exotic type of inlay details of semi-precious stones forming twining vines, fruits, and flowers. So it's got sort of an animation to it. So it's unlike most sites where you go and your image is the same all day long. This has got that amorphic quality over time, which again heightens the awareness of this being a spectacular crown on the palace. So we can go around the edge and do some of the more architectural trim details. So there is a bit of a decorative cornice line here that wraps around the base boxes. And then every time you come to an edge, there's a detail that marries the two pieces together. They're not like a modern corner, they're decorative. And all the arches have got a secondary piece of trim that they sit inside. And there are finials for all the connecting elements as they rise up around the mausoleum. And now we'll address the skin of the earth behind it so that we can really enhance these whites now being more dominant. So we'll simply take a movement of clouds, which will vary just having a singular tone back there. And we'll make that pattern cut through and be more dominant on the left side adjacent to the light. And as we talked about before, the line work for those, it will be simple and broad between the spaces, but as it moves back in the distance, the waves and patterns of those get tighter and tighter together. So that distance is the same as this distance, but this is closer and overhead. So then we simply want to fill in these zones and get on, again, the edge of the pencil and do it a stroke along one angular pitch here is probably the quickest way to do that. And you'll see the strokes in the beginning. We're going to try to wash those out by simply a light tone over and over again until it collapses into a plane. And that way it starts to highlight the dome more. And then we can break it into a bit of white and then back to the sky and have that trace through. And again, so it's just barely aligned. Come right to that corner. And off this edge. And they can start to dissipate off to the right. Again, because once we've centered this, we've kind of created a stasis and less movement in it, but we can still move the eye from left to right with the sky with added value. because again, the eye will be attracted to the most contrast within your sketch. So you're always trying to enhance your subject and not simply create an evenness to everything you see, because if you're staring at the dome in the central axis here, your peripheral view is diminished, and so you lose interest. And so if you heighten those, you have to heighten the content of the center image even stronger. So potentially we'll come back into the lower third of each of these and show the depth of that sky being more poignant when it reaches the cloud itself. We can have that come down a little bit crisper right when it meets that light without having to actually draw a line in there. And now we'll come back into the building and we'll sort of pull it off the page more with the line work for all the edges. And so it's redundancy of coming back to all the lines that are holding space behind it and making sure those are stronger. Double up each one of the turrets, almost like a belt buckle to strap that rotunda and the cylinders wrapping around. And then just like we did up here, where you're creating a void inside this octagonal wrap, we do the same thing for the top of each minaret, even though in a little smaller detail. You strike the dark for underside, the inside of the arch, and then the black is actually the inside face of the arch on the other side of the minaret. And then the base is very important to have that sit as a strong line here. And now the arc of the arch on this side is stronger than the one on the other side. And now perhaps because the absolute brightest white is left to center over here, this plane is much stronger than the ones adjacent to it. We'll keep the white here to keep the presence of it being a very white building year-round in terms of its initial reaction. But this being more dominant because it's actually facing directly to it, will trail off some tone right where it meets it. So even though it's white, it's going to appear a little bit darker than the brighter shade of white adjacent to it. And that'll help crenulate that and move it around a bit. On this side, even though it's almost flush here, we will put a little bit of tone that's cast from a shadow line of that adjacent to it and a little bit of tone to move that plane away from our central one. And then we can probably throw a little bit of a shadow as the sun comes down. This will actually throw a movement of throw a form right there. So we see the connection between light hitting this, the dark side of it, and that throwing a shadow onto the architecture. And this has the need to be pulled up. Little corner minaret, so that pulls up because that dome is set back away from that in the distance there. And now coming down to our water line here, one of the darkest lines again is the water will highlight the underside of the waterway. So it's actually casting a dark reflection of the underside of that as it floats in there. It's stronger on one side. And then the whole waterway is a little bit more muted than the building proper. So we'll wash away some of that tone so it's not as bright and white Maybe accentuate the darkness of that arch right where it meets the distance there. So again, you're grading even the shadow, or excuse me, the reflection of the water to match how this is moving as well. And then the sun that comes this way is also projecting cast shadows from our greenery. So if we go and put a dark edge on the outside of it, we come down to the base and project out some notion of a diagonal line, all in perspective parallel to each other, moving back in space. And that'll set those trees down onto that terrain there. And to help the walkways be a little more mature in terms of their thickness and presence on there, their edge, it just isn't a flat piece of lawn, it actually is raised. And so it'll have an edge to it on this side that helps sit that down and creates more of a movement of a plane from the vertical aspect to it to something perpendicular 90 degrees coming out towards us. And I think with that, we're pretty well done considering this as something that's trying to symbolize earthly life and the afterlife, which is a subset of the symbolization of just the divine. So this Shah Jahan really had this complete idea that was faith-based, that showed the love for his wife, that showed the aspects of the religion and the culture there through geometry and architecture, light and material. And so that's how it's hold on to its powerful symbolism and presence in the lexicon of great global architecture in Agra, India. And to show how this impacts architecture going on, these other two are ecclesiastical buildings. It's not it's a place of prayer and repose, but it's not like an active faith-based thing where the service is actually provided here. But the language of this and the types of Mughal architecture embracing Islamic cultural pieces historically is still in the presence of contemporary work. So in two more contemporary mosques, one in Nigeria here, you can see the same type, even though it's crisper and more modern in detail, it's the same type of presence of that singular dome inside a pure square with the quadrants of the four minarets in east, west, north, and south axes to it. And then moving to another country in a mosque in Russia, the Kul Sharif, a little more elaborate, a little more structurally dynamic, but still has that same type of language, which is predicated on the Mughal architecture at the time when the Taj Mahal was built. And then back to that Preston. So the power of these things we're drawing through these sessions show that they're not all one-offs. It's all part of a stream of ideas, a great river of architectural ideas that are picked up and used over time by various people and cultures.